Imagine you're an actor.
Yep.
And you have just landed, like, the absolute role of a lifetime.
Oh, yeah. The one you've literally worked your entire career for.
Exactly. I mean, you've been selected to play one of the most complex, universally recognized characters in the history of modern literature, and television for that matter.
Right. Huge deal.
It's massive. So, you pop the champagne, you celebrate with your family, and then you finally open your phone to check the news.
Expecting like an outpouring of congratulations.
Right, but instead of celebrating your achievement, your inbox is just immediately flooded with thousands of messages, and they aren't happy.
Wow. Yeah.
Dissecting your identity, they're questioning your merit, and, in the darkest corners of the internet, they are sending explicit death.
Which is just wild to even think about.
It's terrifying. And that whiplash, right? Going from the absolute pinnacle of professional success to the center of this toxic cultural maelstrom. That is exactly what we are exploring today on our deep dive.
Yeah, and it's such a fascinating cultural artifact we're looking at today.
It really is. We're looking at a YouTube video essay by a creator named Emily Butler, and she is just deep in the trenches on this.
Aggressively analyzing the whole thing.
Right. The incredibly heated, internet-breaking casting of Black British actor Papa Essiedu. He was cast as Severus Snape in the upcoming HBO Harry Potter television.
And honestly, it is a remarkable case study. It really shows how modern audiences process this massive collision between legacy and, well, contemporary cultural anxieties.
Totally.
The source material we are working with today, transcript of Butler. And what makes this specific piece of media so compelling is that she isn't just complaining about it.
She goes way deeper.
Right. She's actively attempting to reverse engineer the studio's motivations. I mean, she digs into the actor's background, she evaluates his resume, and she raises these profound questions about the broader implications of applying modern demographic shifts to a beloved franchise.
A deeply, deeply entrenched fantasy franchise.
Yeah.
And the stakes for a character like Snape, I mean, they are astronomically high.
Oh, absolutely.
When you touch Severus Snape, you are touching a live wire of pop culture. Dealing with decades of reader attachment. Plus, you have the incredibly long shadow of Alan Rickman's cinematic portrayal.
Which is iconic.
So iconic.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to unpack this incredibly complex intersection. We're looking at fandom expectations, the objective merit of an actor's craft, and this really intense, often unforgiving lens of modern cultural politics.
Right. We're essentially using Butler's video as a map. We want to navigate how an audience wrestles with the recasting of a legacy character, but happening in real time.
Yes, exactly.
But before we dive into her specific arguments, we really need to establish the analytical framework for this deep dive.
For sure. Ground rules are important.
Yeah, because the source material we are examining, it contains explicitly stated, very strong opinions on modern media trend. The creator frequently uses terms like wokeness, and she is highly critical of what she perceives as identity politics and like liberal agendas within the Hollywood machine. So as you listen today, keep in mind that our objective is not to validate her political world.
Right. We are not here to co-sign her opinions.
Exactly. Nor is it to condemn her or take a side in the broader culture war. Our goal is entirely analytical.
Just looking at the mechanics of it.
Right. We want to impartially deconstruct the architecture of her argument. We need to understand the underlying mechanisms of why a fan feels this kind of profound anxiety and how the modern viewer actively scans media for perceived ideological threats.
Okay, let's unpack this, because reading through Butler's analysis, the root of all this friction, it really seems to be about the total disruption of an established formula.
Right.
Think about this in terms of your brain's predictive models. When you have grown up with a specific piece of media, your brain has hardwired the visual and auditory inputs of that.
You know the exact layout.
Yeah, you know exactly what Hogwarts looks like.
Yeah.
You know exactly how Snape's voice draws. So when a studio announces a reboot, your brain expects a slightly updated version of the exact same data.
Just apologize.
Right. But when they cast someone who shatters that predictive model entirely, a different race, a different cadence, a different background, the brain registers it as an error.
It's like a glitch in the matrix for them.
Exactly. It triggers a defense mechanism. It's like if your favorite local restaurant completely changed its signature recipe, people are going to have very strong visceral feelings about it before they even take a single bite.
That neurological metaphor is highly appropriate here, actually.
Thanks.
Because the creator of our source video, she is experiencing that exact disruption, and she attempts to rationalize it by creating a binary framework.
The option A versus option B thing.
Right. She looks at the casting of Papa Essiedu and basically sees two parallel universes. In one universe, which she categorizes as option A, Essiedu's acting ability is so unbelievably transcendent that he simply forced the studio's hand.
Like he was just undeniable.
Exactly. He walked into the audition room, delivered a performance of such staggering genius that the casting directors had no choice but to give him the role purely on merit, regardless of any demographics.
Right, the undeniable talent argument. But then, there's her alternative universe, option B.
Which is where things get tense.
Yeah, so in this scenario, she posits that HBO didn't cast him for his transcendent audition. Instead, she thinks the studio is intentionally weaponizing identity politics. Option B suggests they are prioritizing a demographic shift and a woke agenda over a traditional text-accurate casting approach. And throughout the video, she's essentially trying to figure out which universe we are currently living in.
And within her exploration of that first universe, the merit-based option A, she actually brings up a vital piece of pop culture history that we really should examine closely.
Oh, I know you're going to say.
Yeah, she compares the situation to the casting of Heath Ledger as the Joker in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight.
Oh, the Heath Ledger paradigm is just the ultimate trump card in literally any casting debate.
It really is.
I mean, I remember the internet forums back in 2006 when that was announced. The vitriol was off the charts. People were absolutely losing their minds because their predictive model of the Joker was Jack.
Or the theatrical comic book mafia boss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here comes the studio casting the pretty boy teen heartthrob from 10 Things I Hate About You.
And A Knight's Tale.
Yeah, it felt like a total betrayal of the source material. But then, of course, the movie comes out and he delivers this completely reimagined, visceral, Oscar-winning performance.
It instantly overrates everyone's previous expectations.
Yeah, and Butler brings this up to acknowledge that Essiedu could be a dark horse in that exact same vein. Like, he might completely rebuild Severus Snape from the ground up and create this distinct, unforgettable interpretation that makes us forget we ever doubted.
She does acknowledge that possibility, which is fair, but her stance is still heavily guarded. She explicitly states that the jury is still out for her, and she intends to withhold her final judgment until she acts performance on.
That sounds reasonable enough on the surface.
It does. However, in the very next breath, she openly admits to harboring a deep resentment toward what she terms woke content.
Ah, there it is.
Yeah. She makes it very clear that she feels exhausted by the modern entertainment industry's tendency to embed social lesson narrative. When she sits down to consume fantasy, she wants the escapism of a good story, not a lecture on contemporary societal.
Which introduces a massive psychological roadblock, if you think about it.
How do you mean?
Well, if you, as a viewer, go into a television show inherently distrusting the studio's motives. Like, if your radar is already aggressively pinging for an agenda, are you even neurologically capable of experiencing a Heath Ledger-style pleasant surprise?
It's a fascinating point.
Right. Because if you're sitting on your couch, arms crossed, just waiting to be preached to, aren't you going to interpret every single line delivery, every lingering camera shot through that hypercritical lens?
You're primed to see it.
Yeah. It feels like the well might be completely poisoned before the opening credits even finish rolling.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really requires an understanding of how fandom construct their ideas. Fandom isn't just about enjoying a product.
It's way deeper.
It often involves a profound, almost literal sense of parasocial ownership over the characters. For millions of readers, Severus Snape isn't just text on a page. He is a complex emotional anchor tied to their formative.
Definitely.
The apprehension surrounding any recasting would be astronomically high simply because Alan Rickman's performance is viewed as definitive. But when you introduce a racial demographic shift into that highly volatile environment,
it acts as a catalyst.
Exactly. It transforms a standard debate about an actor's vocal timbre or physical presence into a proxy war for broader cultural anxiety. The anxiety mutates from, will he sound like Snape? Are they fundamentally altering the philosophical core of a story that belongs?
Right. So how do you even alleviate that anxiety? I mean, if you are Emily Butler and you genuinely want to prove to yourself that option A is real, that this is a merit-based dark horse situation, you have to look for the evidence.
You have to look at
Exactly. You have to look at the actor's past work. But figuring out if a guy can play an iconic, brooding, morally gray potions master isn't exactly straightforward, especially when his resume doesn't feature any brooding, morally gray potions master.
And the creator details her genuine struggle with this evaluation process. She notes that the bulk of Essiedu's highly acclaimed work exists in the realm of contemporary British television and press.
Right, shows like The Capture.
Yes, and Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You. These are nuanced, deeply modern roles. For a general audience member performing a quick internet search to gauge an actor's Snape potential, these performances don't offer an immediate, easily digestible visual or tonal correlation to the halls of Hogwarts.
No, they really don't. So she basically scoured the internet and found two distinct examples that gave her a glimpse into his actual range.
And they are very different from each other.
So different. The first is incredibly highbrow. It's his 2016 stage performance of Hamlet for the Royal Shakespeare Company, which won him the Ian Charleson Award.
A huge honor in British theater.
Massive. She actually watched his To Be or Not to Be soliloquy and compared it side by side with David Tennant's famously manic version.
Okay, that makes sense for Snape. High drama, complex emotions.
Exactly. But the second example, though, is the one that really caught my attention. It's his role in a Black Mirror episode called Demon 79.
The Black Mirror performance is a vital piece of the puzzle here. Walk through how the source describes his work in that specific app, because the tonal dissonance is exactly what makes casting predictions so difficult.
The dissonance is wild. I mean, in Demon 79, Essiedu plays a literal demon from hell who is tethered to a very normal, unassuming young woman.
Okay.
But he doesn't manifest as some terrifying, grotesque monster with horns and hooves. He actually takes on the physical appearance of a charismatic singer from a disco group.
Wait, really? A disco singer?
Yeah, because he knows she'll find that form appealing. So he wears these incredibly loud, flamboyant outfits. And the core tension of the episode is that he casually, almost cheerfully, informs her that she has to brutally murder 3 innocent people, or the literal apocalypse will occur.
That is quite the tonal whiplash.
Right. He delivers terrifying cosmic ultimatums with this upbeat, charming, almost bureaucratic nonchalance. It's a brilliant performance, but it is galaxies away from Severus.
And the video's creator acutely feels that distance. To illustrate her frustration, she contrasts Essiedu's opaque portfolio with the actor HBO recently cast to play Draco Malfoy, a young man the source identifies as Locke Pratt.
Oh, the Locke Pratt comparison. Yeah. That is the perfect distillation of how the internet functions as an armchair casting director.
How?
Well, Butler points out that Pratt recently starred in a British miniseries adaptation of Lord of the Flies. She pulls up a clip of him playing a character stranded on an island, essentially devolving into savage.
The classic Lord of the Flies.
Exactly. He delivers a line to the effect of, "We hunted all day until we died here. Shut up, fatty. We needed meat and we got."
Oh, wow. Brutal.
So brutal. And the moment that clip hit the internet, the collective fandom breathed a sigh of relief. Everyone watched a pale, blonde kid being incredibly cruel and entitled to a marginalized peer and instantly said, "Yep, that's Draco Malfoy."
It was a frictionless cognitive leap for them.
Totally friction. You see him play a vicious bully on a beach, so it requires zero imagination to picture him as a vicious bully in a cast. Essie doesn't have that viral shortcut. He is fighting a massive uphill battle in the court of public opinion simply because he hasn't handed the internet a one-to-one translation of the character they want to see.
It makes a lot of sense when you frame it that way.
It makes me think about culinary arts.
Oh, tell me.
So, evaluating Essiedu for Snape based on his Black Mirror performance is like trying to judge a master baker's ability to make a delicate, perfectly laminated French croissant.
Okay, I'm following.
But the only thing the judges are allowed to taste is the chef's award-winning 5-alarm spicy chili. Right. You taste the chili, and you immediately recognize the immense talent. The depth of flavor is incredible. The technique is flawless. Clearly, this person is a magnificent cook. But does that guarantee they understand the precise, delicate chemistry of pastry dough? You have to use a massive, strenuous amount of imagination to connect the skill set. And that immense imaginative leap is exactly what the audience is struggling to make with Essiedu.
That analogy perfectly isolates the friction of the unknown. However, to the creator's credit, she doesn't entirely dismiss his potential.
She does.
No, after analyzing the Hamlet and Black Mirror clips, she concedes that Essiedu possesses an undeniable magnetic presence.
Okay, so she sees the talent.
She does. She specifically highlights his vocal control, noting his ability to dramatically alter his accent, cadence, and entire persona between roles. She acknowledges that he is absolutely not a one-trick pony.
Well, that's reassuring.
And if we look at the mechanical requirements of a dark horse casting triumph, an actor requires an almost dangerous level of emotional elasticity.
Yeah, they have to be a chameleon.
Exactly. Delivering the crushing existential dread of Shakespearean tragedy and then immediately pivoting to the terrifying, bubbly charisma of a television. Those are actually the foundational architectural skills needed to construct a character like Severus Snape.
That makes total sense. We're talking about a character who spends 7 massive novels meticulously hiding his true, agonizing loyalties behind a flawlessly constructed facade of bitter cruelty.
Right. It requires immense range.
Okay, so that is the case for option A. The talent is clearly there, even if the direct visual proof isn't perfectly mapped out yet. But what happens if the truth leans toward option B?
The dreaded option B.
Yeah. What if the studio's primary motivation wasn't just his talent, but a conscious desire to inject real-world racial themes into the fantasy narrative? Because Butler completely pivots her analysis away from his acting resume here and dives straight into the incredibly heavy, complicated narrative implications of his race.
This represents a crucial escalation in her arc. The source material delves into the idea that casting non-white actors in a legacy property that was originally written without those demographics in mind doesn't just change the surface.
Right, it's not just a palette swap.
Exactly. She argues it fundamentally interacts with the text. The creator claims that this creates a highly problematic gray area within the story's internal logic.
And to be clear, it's not just Snape. The video points out that the character of Hermione Granger is also not being played by a white actress in this new adaptation. Butler brings up a very specific, deeply ingrained plot point from the second book. Hermione is called a mudblood by Draco Malfoy.
Which is a heavy moment in the series.
Very. In the isolated context of the fantasy world, it's a severe slur. It's used by blood-purist wizards to demean those who are born to non-magical or muggle parents.
And the creator presents a fascinating literary critique here. She argues that when characters who experience systemic prejudice within a purely fantasy setting are portrayed by actors of color, the fictional allegory suddenly and violently collides with real-world history.
It stops being pretend prejudice.
Exact. The prejudice on screen is no longer safely contained within the realm of magical bloodline. The visual reality of the actor's skin color drags the immense, crushing weight of real-world racism, historical oppression, and modern societal trauma directly.
That's a lot of weight for a kid's fantasy show.
It is. The creator explicitly views this allegorical bleed as a massive red flag. She states quite firmly that she does not want to be served that kind of heavy, real-world material.
She just wants the magic.
Right. She prefers her fantasy to remain a pure, hermetically sealed, escapist environment, entirely free from the exhaustion of real-world socio-political...
And it gets significantly darker when her analysis turns back to Snape. Well, the video highlights a conversation already bubbling up on social media regarding the inevitable flashback scene. There are these vital, psychologically devastating scenes later in the story where James Potter, Harry's father, and his gang of friends mercilessly bully a young Severus Snape.
The pensive memories.
Exactly. In one specific memory, they ambush him, they use magic to hang him upside down from a tree, and they humiliate him in front of a cheering crowd of students.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
Yeah. Butler points out that audiences are already doing the math on this image. If Snape is a black teenager, a scene where a group of wealthy, privileged boys hangs him upside down from a tree suddenly takes on an agonizing, profoundly disturbing racial component.
It unavoidably invokes the historical visual language of lynching.
It does. Completely changes the text of that.
Which leads the creator to develop what we could call the progressive counterweight theory.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, she refuses to believe that HBO's executives and showrunners are blind to these new, highly charged visual realities. In fact, she theorizes that they might actively desire these heavy racial themes to be present in the new adaptation.
Wait, she thinks they want that imagery in there. Why?
The motivation, according to the source, is directly tied to the highly publicized ongoing controversy surrounding the franchise creator, J.K. Rowling, particularly her views on transgenders.
Okay. The PR balancing.
Exactly. The theory posits that HBO is intentionally making the series sufficiently woke by introducing real-world racial dynamics into the fantasy prejudice as a calculated strategic
win-back favor.
Right, to win back a specific demographic of progressive viewers who had previously vowed to boycott any new Harry Potter media.
That is incredibly cynical. But it forces us to ask a really difficult question about the nature of adaptation. Does grounding a fantasy prejudice in real-world visual realities make a story richer, more mature, and more resonant? Or does it fundamentally violate the escapist contract that the original story offers?
It's a tough line to walk.
It really is. Because if you sit down on a Friday night to watch wizards fly on brooms and cast spells, and suddenly you are confronted with a heavy visual allegory that forces you to mentally process real-world systemic racism and historical lynchings, is that elevating the art form?
Some critics would argue yes.
Sure, some would. But, or is it, as Butler deeply fears, a bait and switch? Are you being tricked into a sociology seminar when you paid for a magic show?
That tension between art as pure escapism and art as a reflection of reality is the absolute epicenter of this entire cultural debate.
Totally.
And to try and uncover the actual intentions of the studio and the actor, to see if this was indeed a purposeful, politically motivated strategy, the creator turns her attention away from the text and toward the press tour.
Which is where things get really messy.
Specifically, she analyzes a highly revealing recent interview Essiedu gave to the Times of London. And this interview opens up an entirely new, highly cynical set of questions regarding the machinery of celebrity public.
The press tour analysis is where the video gets really combative. So Butler reads through this massive feature article in the Times. The piece reveals that ever since his casting was announced, Papa Essiedu has been subjected to severe, highly targeted, racially motivated backlash.
Which we touched on at the beginning.
Right. And it isn't just people complaining on Twitter. He is receiving explicit death threat. The article quotes him direct, stating that people have literally sent him messages saying, "Quit or I'll murder you."
That is just horrifying.
It's awful. Now, the creator's immediate reaction to this information is highly calibrated.
Calibrated how?
Well, she begins by establishing a firm baseline of condemnation. She emphatically states that anyone sending death threats over television casting requires serious professional help.
Okay, good.
Yeah, she even goes as far as advocating for the return of mental asylum for individuals who engage in that level of unhinged behavior. She unequivocally condemns the threats as abhorrent.
I sense a but coming.
A massive, defining but in her worldview. She immediately pivots to questioning why this specific information is being front-loaded in a major publication's feature article.
Interesting.
Her argument essentially boils down to, look, all famous people get death threats. It's an unfortunate, terrible reality of the internet, but there are crazy people out there, and that's exactly why movie stars have security.
So she thinks it's being weaponized.
Yes. She harbors a deep suspicion that spotlighting these racist death threats in the very first major press push is a deliberate, highly coordinated PR strategy. She believes the studio is proactively creating a traumatic victim narrative right out of the gate.
What's fascinating here is how the source deconstructs the cynical mechanics of the modern entertainment press cycle.
Yeah, break that down.
The creator articulates a profound fear that the studio executives and the actors' representation are building a structural fallback.
Oh, fallback.
Right. The logic operates. If they immediately center the global conversation around the racist abuse the actor is receiving right now, they build an impenetrable shield around the production.
Oh, I see.
If the series ultimately fails to capture an audience, or if it receives poor reviews for clunky writing, bad pacing, or even a subpar performance, the studio never has to take artistic accountability.
They can just blame the haters.
Exactly. They can simply point to the early controversy and blame the show's failure on the racists and the toxic fandom. She views this as a deeply cynical maneuver to insulate a potentially mediocre corporate product from legitimate artistic criticism by weaponizing the actor's real-world victimization.
That makes me think about the mechanics of sports media, actually.
Another analogy, let's hear it.
Imagine a professional basketball team holding a massive press conference 3 days before the championship finals.
Okay.
But instead of talking about their strategy or their training, all the coach and the players do is complain to the media about how the referees have a documented history of being biased against them.
Setting the stage for a loss.
Exactly. Even if their complaints are statistically true, as a fan of that team, it makes you incredibly suspicious. You start thinking, wait a minute, do you guys not trust your own ability to win this game on the court? Why are we painstakingly setting up elaborate excuses before the clock even starts?
It shows a lack of confidence.
Right. And Butler feels like HBO is screaming about the referees before the first episode even airs.
That analogy perfectly captures the skepticism she is broadcast. But if we are dissecting this impartially, we have to challenge that, consider the broader, often uncontrollable reality of the modern.
Okay, let's challenge it.
When an actor receives a deluge of targeted, explicit racial abuse following a high-profile cast, is it actually, as the creator terms it, sneaky writing for a journalist at the Times to ask him about it?
That's a good point.
Right. Or is it simply an unavoidable, dominant reality of modern casting in the internet age? If a journalist sits down with an actor whose life has just been threatened thousands of times in a week and chooses not to ask about it, aren't they committing journalistic malpractice?
Yeah, they'd be ignoring the biggest story in the room.
Aren't they failing to report the most impactful reality of the subject's current experience?
It really is a chicken and egg scenario of the internet age. Did the brilliant Machiavellian PR team plant the story to build a shield, or did the internet's horrifically toxic reaction organically force the story into existence, leaving the actor with no choice but to address the elephant in the room?
It's impossible to know for sure.
But here is where the creator's hyper-focus on the PR conspiracy might have caused her to miss the most important artistic clue in the entire video.
What is she?
Because the Times interview wasn't solely focused on the internet backlash. The journalist also got Essiedu to reveal some deeply, deeply personal, tragic details about his early life. And when you actually analyze those details, it fundamentally changes everything about how you should expect him to play Severus Snape.
This is a pivotal transition in the analysis. The source material shares some incredibly poignant, heavy background details provided in that interview.
Yeah, it's pretty heartbreaking stuff.
Essiedu reveals that his father returned to Ghana when the actor was only 4 years old, effectively leaving the family. And he subsequently died when Essiedu was just 14.
Just a kid.
Right. So he was raised entirely by his mother, who worked as a fashion and design teacher. Tragically, she passed away from breast cancer when he was just 20 years old, striking at the exact moment he was beginning drama school and stepping into adulthood.
The compounding emotional toll of that kind of consecutive loss is just staggering to think about.
Truly.
The article notes that he experienced what he described as an intense brain fog due to the overwhelming grief of losing his only parent at such a young age. He speaks very openly and vulnerably about relying on ongoing therapy to manage severe anxiety and to actively avoid falling into deep, paralyzing unhappiness.
It's a lot for a young person to carry.
But he also balances that darkness by talking about the profound, grounding joy he finds in his marriage and the exciting prospect of becoming a parent himself.
And I have to point out that Emily Butler, despite all her cynicism about the studio's PR motive, actually pauses her critique right here.
She does.
She does. She reads this tragic backstory and openly admits it's so beautiful you can't hate on him for that. She demonstrates genuine human respect for his resilient face of tragedy.
Well, that's refreshing. But here's where it gets really interesting and where I think the casting choice suddenly makes a terrifying amount of sense.
Break it down.
Look past the racial dynamics for a second and look purely at the psychological parental abandonment at a very young age. The devastating premature loss of the only person who truly loved and supported him. Overwhelming, suffocating grief. A profound feeling of isolation during his formative educational year. Battling through intense mental anguish and anxiety just to function. That is not just Papa Essiedu's biography. That is the exact literal psychological blueprint of Severus Snape.
It really is.
Snape's entire narrative arc is defined by an abusive, miserable upbringing, the traumatic loss of Lily Potter, the only light in his life, and the burden of carrying that suffocating secret grief for decades.
The parallels are undeniable.
If an actor has that kind of deep, devastating, real-world emotional well to draw from, the Stanislavski method implications are incredible. He isn't just pretending to be sad. He knows the specific gravity of that exact type of grief. He could deliver a performance of such authentic, agonizing depth that it makes the audience weep.
That is a highly compelling artistic analysis, and it perfectly illustrates how actors utilize personal trauma to fuel fictional resonance.
Yep.
However, the source video doesn't linger on that artistic parallel.
Of course not.
Butler immediately pivots back to her overarching concerns regarding political motive, because the interview doesn't stop at his personal grief. Essiedu goes on to discuss why the current internet abuse affects him, and more importantly, why he chooses to push through it rather than quit.
What does he say?
He states that the abuse actually fuels him. He explicitly says he wants to claim this iconic character and make it his own, specifically so that young kids who look like him can see themselves represented at the highest levels of the magical world of Hogwarts.
Yeah, and the interview dives even deeper into his societal worldview, too.
Right.
He talks about his own educational experience, mentioning that he attended a private forest school in East London. He explains that he got in on what he calls a Tory policy designed to help poorer kids attend prestigious, wealthy schools. He describes that environment in stark terms, stating that racism, misogyny, and homophobia were rife among the student body. He characterizes his adolescence as existing in a dog-eat-dog world, where the cruelty of the kids was simply a direct reflection of the prejudiced society they were growing.
And this societal perspective culminates in his answer to a very pointed question from the journalist.
What was the question?
The journalist asks him direct, why take on this incredibly high pressure, infinitely controversial job with all its attached toxicity over something perceived as a safer, easier cash grab, like taking a supporting role in a Star Wars spinoff?
A valid question. Why invite the headache?
Essiedu's response is that he chose Harry Potter because the core underlying themes of the story are fundamentally about love triumphing over hate and the vitalness of acceptance.
Which, if you were Emily Butler, is the ultimate undeniable gotcha.
Absolutely.
She outlines how she views those specific buzzword-heavy statements as the smoking gun absolute proof of an underlying woke mindset that she inherently distrusts.
Right. It confirms her option.
Her reaction to his quotes about seeking demographic representation and his harrowing stories of systemic prejudice at his private school is blunt. She tells the actor to leave that at the door.
That's a strong directive.
She forcefully argues that the magical, whimsical world of Harry Potter is not the harsh, prejudiced, dog-eat-dog society he grew up in East London. Therefore, she believes his modern, real-world societal grievances have absolutely no place in shaping the internal life or motivations of a character like Severus Snape.
She is attempting to draw a very rigid, impermeable line between acceptable and unacceptable artistic inspiration.
What do you mean?
Well, in her view, drawing upon personal familial grief to add emotional depth to a performance is entirely acceptable. It serves the universal human emotion of the text.
Right.
But drawing upon personal lived experiences of systemic societal prejudice to inform a character's motivation, wholly reject. She views that as an act of smuggling a contemporary political agenda across the border to a fantasy realm where it does not.
Which brings us to the final and arguably most cynical piece of the entire puzzle.
The studio itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
After spending 20 minutes intensely analyzing the actor's resume, his trauma, and his political worldview, the creator pulls the camera way, way back. She stops looking at Papa Essiedu and starts looking at the massive corporate monolith writing his checks.
HBO.
Right. What exactly is HBO getting out of this absolute firestorm of controversy?
Butler theorizes a level of corporate machination that is almost frightening in its calculations.
It really is.
She posits that the executives at HBO knew exactly what they were doing from the very minute they greenlit this cast. She suggests they modeled and anticipated every single sequential piece of this fallout.
Like they planned the whole thing.
Yes. The massive, immediate internet criticism, the endless, agonizing culture war debates raging across YouTube and Twitter, and the inevitable high-profile mainstream media articles pearl-clutching about racist death threats.
It is essentially a grand unified theory of outrage marketing.
Outrage marketing. That's a good term for it.
The logic is that by making a casting choice they absolutely knew would be highly inflammatory to a very vocal, very protective segment of the legacy fan base, HBO guaranteed one invaluable metric: relevant.
Right. You can't buy that kind of...
No, you really can't. They ensured that their new show, which frankly many people argued didn't even need to be made so soon after the movies, would absolutely dominate global internet conversations for years before a single episode ever aired.
It's all anyone is talking about.
Butler points out the grim reality of modern viewership. People are going to tune in no matter what they're tweeting.
Exactly.
The detractors, the ones furious about the woke agenda, are going to hate watch the premiere just to confirm their suspicions and gather ammunition for their next video essay. And the supporters are going to tune in to fiercely defend the actor and see if the show is actually brilliant.
It's a win-win for the network.
It doesn't matter if you are watching with a smile or a scowl. To the HBO servers, a stream is a stream. The studio gets the monumental viewership numbers either way.
This raises an important question about the sustainability of the modern streaming land.
Let's hear it.
In today's hyper-fragmented attention economy, attention itself, whether it is rapturous, universally positive, or purely vitriolically toxic, is the ultimate most coveted currency.
Sad but true.
But we have to ask, is it truly a sustainable long-term business model for a legacy studio to purposefully agitate and alienate a massive vocal segment of its core foundational fan base simply to drive a massive spike in opening weekend hate-watching metrics?
I mean, it feels like playing with corporate dynamite.
It's extremely risky.
It might guarantee you a record-breaking premiere rating and the executives get to pop champagne on Monday morning. Yeah. But if the core fans feel genuinely manipulated, if they feel like their childhood attachments were used as bait for a culture war marketing stunt, do they actually stick around for season 3, season 4, season 7?
That's the real test.
A television show requires a long-term relationship with an audience, and you can't build a 7-year relationship on a foundation of mutual resentment. It's a colossal existential gamble for the franchise.
It is a gamble with incredibly high human stake. And the creator's analysis highlights one final, almost tragic point of tension in Essiedu's interview that perfectly encapsulates the entire...
That's the final point.
At the very end of the Times article, after discussing the abuse and the representation, the actor emphatically, almost pleadingly states that he got the job on the absolute merit of his talent.
Like chop Shanae.
Exactly. He says, point blank, that if he believed he was only hired to fulfill a demographic quota or his race, it wouldn't be a project he would ever want to work on.
Wow.
So we are left looking at this incredible, painful friction. You have an artist desperately wanting to be judged purely on the merit of his craft. You have a massive corporate studio that arguably thrives on and monetizes the free marketing generated by the controversy of his existence. And you have an exhausted audience caught in the middle, actively scanning the horizon for political red flags before before they've even been given a chance to watch the story unfold.
So what does this all mean for us, the audience? We've covered an immense amount of ground.
We really have.
We started with Emily Butler's fundamental option A versus option B frame. Is this a triumph of pure acting merit or the execution of a calculated cultural agenda?
The Heath Ledger paradigm.
Right. We dug deep into Papa Essiedu's award-winning acting history, struggling to find the connective tissue between a charismatic demon and a brooding wizard.
The pastry versus chili analogy.
Exactly. We uncovered the incredibly heavy, profound personal grief in his life that actually mirrors Severus Snape's own traumatic arc in ways a casting director could only dream of.
And we examined the massive, highly controversial narrative implications of race-swapping legacy characters, exploring how real-world visual allegories can shatter the escapist fantasy for some viewers.
And finally, we looked at the deeply cynical, yet highly plausible theory that HBO is using the inevitable culture war sensationalism as a deliberate, weaponized marketing engine.
It is a vast, incredibly complex web of artistic ambition, corporate commerce, and deep-seated modern cultural anxiety.
It really is.
And so, as we wrap up this analysis, we turn the focus over to you. Think about the next time you sit down to watch a highly anticipated reboot or adaptation of a property you have loved since childhood.
The stakes are always high with nostalgia.
How much of the deafening internet discourse do you actually carry into the room when the screen finally goes dark and the iconic music begins to swell? Are you truly opening your mind to experience, or is a part of your brain just sitting in the dark, meticulous the red flag?
It's a genuinely tough question to answer, honestly, because none of us are completely immune to the noise. And it leaves me with one final, perhaps slightly uncomfortable thought to mull over.
I'm intrigued.
We spend so much of our time and energy on the internet fiercely debating who gets to play these legendary characters. We build these massive fortresses around our nostalgia.
We're very protective of it.
Very. But at what point does the fierce, unyielding protection of a fictional world's purity actually prevent that specific story from growing up, evolving, and maturing alongside its audience?
Agree.
If a beloved story is so incredibly fragile that it cannot survive a new interpretation or a slightly different reflection of the world that created it, how strong was the magic in the first?
A highly provocative question, and exactly the kind of critical inquiry to our...
Thank you for joining us on this massive journey as we unpack the noise behind the news. Keep questioning the media you consume, keep pushing back against the easy narratives, keep an open mind, and we will see you on the next Deep Dive.